Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the 47th session of Majlis Khonji. Today, we have another interesting topic about the international business insights to discuss the current themes in the international business environment and the opportunities for Oman. Please allow me to introduce our guest for this session, Mr. Ian Johnson, the Head of International Subsidiary Banking from HSBC Bank Oman. With over 12 years of corporate banking experience with HSBC, Ian leads the international subsidiary banking business for HSBC in Oman, representing the local offices of HSBC's global client relationships. He has a global coverage experience from banking roles in the UK, HK, Kazakhstan, Egypt, Dubai, Singapore, and Oman. Welcome, Mr. Ian, to Majlis Khonji. And I would like also to welcome Mr. Khalil Al-Blushi in moderating this session with us today. Over to you, Mr. Khalil, then to our guest to start. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Riham. Thank you. Good morning, all. Thanks to Majlis Khonji for giving me the chance to moderate the 47th session of our sessions in the Majlis. On behalf of the Majlis, I would like to welcome you all to this interesting topic. I'm pleased to moderate on a topic with international aspects, especially in 2020, where the global business environment is very gloomy. We, being internal part of the international community, we get affected by what is happening in the world and around us. Oman's economy largely depends on energy sector, and with oil prices averaging around 40 and not expected to rise significantly in 2021, the economy faces serious challenges. At international level, just after the pandemic started widely, it was expected that the global economy will shrink more than it did in 2008 crisis. The biggest hit was in the first half of the year, as many countries started opening up in around July in 2020, the situation improved. The 2021 forecast is not expected to grow as desired, especially that the situation with the pandemic is still forcing many countries, at least to partially lock down. So going back to pre-pandemic levels of activities remains prone to setbacks, and that is expected. Closer to home in MENA region, while oil exporters were hard hit by a double whammy of the lockdown impact and the resulting decline in demand and price of oil. Add to it the disruption of trade and tourism, which added extra burden on economies. Looking back to Oman, in Oman there are steps being taken to reduce the impact of this storm and to steer the ship towards safer waters. In the first speech, His Majesty the Sultan focused on steps being taken. I quote from his speech, "We will also be committed to directing our financial resources in the most ideal manner, which will ensure the reduction of debt and the increase of income. We will direct the government with all its sectors to implement a more efficient system of management, which places on top of its priorities financial balance, economic diversification, the sustainability of the national economy, besides developing all relevant laws and regulations." Unquote. The 2040 vision set many priorities, some of them directly addressing the economical aspects, like labor market and employment, economic leadership and management, economic diversification, fiscal sustainability and the private sector, investment and international cooperation. With this, I welcome again Mr. Ian Johnson, our speaker for the day, to give us insights of international business and the opportunities in Oman. This is going to be an interactive session. It will be a two-way discussion. This is how I think Ian has set it up. So please enjoy and welcome, Ian.
Thank you very much. So, hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining today. Before we start the presentation, just a little bit more about myself. I'm Ian Johnson, and as you probably guessed by now, I work for HSBC. I lead the team that looks after all of the international subsidiaries that are banking here in Oman with us. So that's where they have a headquarters overseas. So we have around 250 customers, and I've been lucky enough to have been working in Oman for the last 3 years. I'll always have a special connection to the country because 2 of my children were born here. And this is a very important topic for me personally, just because I think it's a real opportunity. As Rehan mentioned, I've worked around the world for the HSBC group, and in that time I've worked very closely with a range of multinational companies doing business in some of these different places. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Khalil Al-Khonji for the kind invitation to come today, Mike for his very tremendous support, and Mr. Khalil Al-Balushi for his support as well. So just in terms of formalities, I'm required by my compliance department to show you this slide. If I can summarize, it says that the bank absolves itself of any responsibility for what I'm about to say. If you are interested to read them, I can share it afterwards. So I'll start with this quote, and you're probably wondering why this quote. Well, the reason is it strikes a bit of a chord because last week I asked the owner of a tech startup specializing in optimizing software for the cloud about his experience setting up a company. This is fairly topical. And he spent a very emotional 15 minutes ranting about how vague tax, a government employee who didn't understand startups work, an appeals process that was non-existent, not ideal. You're probably wondering about, where am I talking about? And you might be as surprised as I was to know that it was Switzerland. And I certainly didn't expect that given Switzerland's reputation, but it was a nice reminder that perceptions are there and they can be changed. So the reason I was talking to him is as part of my research for today, because I really wanted to cover 3 things. That's the international business environment today, how multinational businesses are choosing locations, and the discussion on some of the opportunities that presents for Oman. And I'm sure we'll also cover some of the challenges at the same time. So to start with, to do something a little bit different, I'm going to ask for your participation. So everyone who's at a computer, and apologies, I'm not sure how this might be represented on the different mobile formats, but if you go up to the top of your screen, you should see the view options, and there should be a way to select to annotate. Again, there's different Zoom implementations, so if everyone can click the annotate button, then select one of the stamps. Obviously, I'm hoping for lots of stars today, especially if you rate my presentation highly. And then if you could just have a go stamping in the box down here, just to show me that it is working for everyone. And there we go. Just give everyone a few seconds. I can see we're starting to get those coming through now. Thank you. I'll just I'll clear the screen, but we'll come back to this in a second. So let's start with what are the benefits of international business for a country, and specifically Oman. Well, on this slide, I've picked out 4 potential benefits for a country for attracting international business. And I'd like everyone to just use their newly found stamping ability. Just stamp in the box that you think are the one that applies the most. Obviously, there can be multiple answers. I'm pleased this is working. Obviously, it's in the modern times with changes in technology, it's always a bit of a concern as to how these things will play out. So I'm pleased to see we are getting some good responses in here. just give a few more seconds. Okay, I mean, that's an interesting response because it's fairly evenly spread. And actually, these are all recognized benefits, so there was no wrong answers. I should probably clarify that up front. Now, in summer of 2019, HSBC approached 9,000 businesses over 35 countries and territories to ask for their views. And I'll just clear the screen again and show you the results. So over 2/3 had these all as identified benefits. And this is, again, 9,000 companies around the world. And I think you'll recognize the similarities with some of the Vision 2040 objectives and related to His Majesty's priorities that Kelly had summarized earlier. And it just helps show the potential role that international business can play in supporting Oman's national priorities. Now, you may be wondering, how many of these international businesses are out there? Well, of those 9,000 that we surveyed, it was only actually less than 1 in 10 that said they wanted to remain exclusively domestic. I think that's quite an opportunity for Oman. It's fairly significant. I would at this point highlight HSBC's main attraction is our broad international network. So this may not be representative of all businesses out there, but it's certainly an opportunity. Now, I can't talk about international business without mentioning protectionism. 2/3 of the businesses that we discussed, that we surveyed, highlighted it as one of the as an issue for them, and the biggest impacts were on additional regulation, making it more difficult to do business, and forcing changes on supply chains. These dislocations will present short-term opportunities for Oman. I discussed this yesterday with the CEO of a FTSE 100 global engineering firm. We highlighted examples such as the UK car industry in the 1960s and 70s that were unable to sustain employment due to lack of competitiveness due to protectionist policies. So competition can be a force for good, but as the old proverb goes, the difference between medicine and poison is the dosage. And that's something that Oman will have to consider in a number of areas in the future. So this is all great, but I think it's important to look ahead, and that's really what I'd like to spend a little bit of time on. And we also asked companies about their plans and priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. They highlighted both technology and sustainability as key themes for that time period. For technology, the most important areas were expected to be data security, 5G, and artificial intelligence. AI and ML is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And this is something that can be considered when looking at areas of future investment. Sustainability is getting a lot of focus because businesses see it as improving efficiency, providing competitive advantage, and part of good corporate citizenship demanded by some of their investors and stakeholders. And in fact, 21%, so that's around 1/5 of companies surveyed, saw it as essential to their long-term survival. So again, it's a potential area of opportunity for the country. By now, some of you are thinking, typical banker. He's always looking at last year's results. This is a very different year. So thankfully, HSBC surveyed a further 2,600 decision makers across 14 territories earlier this year, asking them how the current crisis has affected them and their plans for the future. The results showed that the crisis is acting as a catalyst for some of these long-term trends, and despite physical distancing and lockdowns, 4 in 5 businesses say they've grown closer to employees, customers, and suppliers. I've personally seen this here in Oman, and I really feel that people have been acting on a clear preference for collaboration over self-sufficiency. And I think that's something we can all be proud of. Business leaders are saying they're increasingly focused on culture. This appears to be a lesson from other companies because the agile companies coming into the crisis have proven more resilient. Why agile? Why culture? Well, actually it allows emerging opportunities to be realized. And I think that's a key takeaway for businesses and public sector in Oman, given some of the challenges ahead. Another area of opportunity will be changes in supply chain. And there's a lot of discussion about this. I see a lot of news reports, but our research indicates that the trends are towards nearshoring and reshaping those supply chains rather than the concept of reshoring, which I think, again, Oman, given its geographic location, has some potential opportunities. You shouldn't be surprised to see technology and sustainability there again. These are becoming ingrained in how businesses operate, and these are deep structural trends that are unlikely to reverse after the crisis. For technology, it's essential for continuity, but also, more broadly, it enables cultural change through that greater agility. And today's session being on Zoom is a great example of this in practice. Based on the feedback I've had from a range of my customers, that's 250 I mentioned, this is an area of opportunity for Oman by making it easier to do business with things like acceptance of the cloud and acceptance of multi-geography business processes, some people refer to as offshoring. And the focus on sustainability has actually accelerated, with 85% of businesses seeing it now as a priority. So I've hopefully given some insights really into the mindset of these multinational businesses. I'd like to talk a little bit about how companies are selecting locations, because I think it helps frame a little bit of what Oman can do. So I'll start with this, which is Mercer, an advisory company. Their research highlights 4 key areas that are used by businesses when selecting locations. I don't think anyone's surprised to see labor there, and they're interested in what is the caliber of talent. This includes diversity, technical skills, business skills, languages, and for tech companies in particular, education levels, because they prefer sometimes the fresh graduates who they can then shape and grow themselves. But also, interestingly, what are the demographic trends, particularly around age profiles? And I think that this is one where Oman has a real advantage if you look at the age demographics, but also one of the hidden gems that I've personally experienced is the groups of students that the country's sponsored to study overseas. I can say with genuine meaning that these are a real asset to any company. Skill sets are a thorny challenge because they vary by sector, but it is something that needs to be factored in. Coming to cost, it's hiring staff, and the other businesses' costs, transport, power, telecommunications. But I think it's important to highlight that it's not just salaries, it's total remuneration, and that includes general and wage inflation, as well as taxation, employment-wise, and on corporates. Here again, Oman has some real advantages, but according to feedback from some of my customers, I think there are areas of opportunity, particularly around wage inflation. Business climate, this means all the non-labor factors about location, such as weather, natural hazard risk, transportation options, personal security, cultural life, and quality of the built and natural environment. Here, I think Oman actually does very well. Safety and personal security is among the highest globally, and it's a wonderful natural environment. I love getting out into the mountains. I love getting out into the interior and seeing the beautiful country the countryside that Oman has to offer. The fourth factor is community, and that's about regulations for labor, taxes, and import tariffs, as well as political stability, which again, Oman does well on. The ease of difficulty of setting up a business, the quality of infrastructure and levels of corruption. Again, I think Oman actually does fairly well. And the recent developments, including the laws around promoting inward investments, I think are very positive. If I look at this holistically, I think really, one of the key things that struck me a little bit was just around building the country's profile a little bit, because there are some advantages here, and I don't think they're as well known or understood outside of the business community here. Now, I'm not a communications or marketing expert, but I am a Newcastle United fan. So those of you interested in football would be pleased to know. So if any of the people listening today wanted to help put Oman in the news, I think a well-funded takeover bid would be an option. But Simon, you mentioned about about getting rich. This is definitely not one of the most financially rewarding investments you can make. Football clubs very rarely are. Now, I say this in jest, but it is an important point, and I really wanted to kind of dig into this a little bit. So I spoke to some of my old customers around the world, and in particular, I was lucky enough late last night. I spoke to the CEO of a FTSE 100 global engineering firm that I mentioned yesterday. He was kind enough to give quite a lot of time, and what he highlighted is that when considering where to set up his manufacturing sites, and they're operating in over 50 countries globally, he looks for two main things, and that's the rule of law being applied equally and reasonable competitiveness for both human capital and products. Interestingly, nationalization policies were not seen as a deal breaker unless it resulted in underperformers being overly protected. And in fact, rigid labor laws mean he's avoided acquisitions that came up in countries like Spain, Italy, and France. So it's important to remember this is not just a point for the Middle East as well. And just to help dispel some of the myths around a preference for expats, their company actively avoids using them because they're seen as expensive. Where they do see a need to bridge a skill gap or help align culture after an acquisition, the people they tend to send are usually the talented individuals who help raise the performance benchmark. But the expectation is from that company that they recruit and train their replacements from the local workforce during their time overseas. Coming back to the tech business owner I referred to earlier, the sentiments were fairly similar. But in addition, he was looking for a pool of well-educated English-speaking software engineers and intellectual property protection. Now, I've picked these companies because I wanted some representation of the sectors that have been highlighted in things like the 10 feed, manufacturing and engineering, as well as the knowledge economy. But you've got to remember these are anecdotal points from my own network. And in fact, it's not very easy to get public information about how companies do this. There are a couple of examples, such as Amazon's 2017 search for their second headquarters location in the USA. Now, as a tech firm, naturally, they were interested in a large pool of potential employees. So specified areas with a population greater than 1 million, which I think Muscat has, and sought details on level of education. And again, some of the internet research I did seemed to put Oman in quite a good position in terms of relative education levels. Now, some saw this as a bit of a fishing exercise to see what concessions they could negotiate. But either way, over 200 locations submitted responses, and I'm sure provided some excellent insights for Amazon. Now, I actually wanted to use this to reiterate some of the benefits these kind of companies bring to an area. And this is an extract from their own request for proposals that they sent out. And I've highlighted the one that really struck me, which is that over the period of 2010 to 17, they'd assessed themselves as having around 40,000 employees. But as a result of their investment in the Seattle area, they'd estimated they generated a further 53,000 jobs, which is more than they employed directly. I was personally, I was quite surprised at this. I think it's important to highlight as well. Obviously, some of these were not as well paid as the Amazon jobs, which you can see in the relative compensation points. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by the number of hotel nights. That was one thing I personally didn't expect either. And I just think, given Oman's interest in promoting tourism, this is again another crossover area where international business can help with that. Now, I will caution this a little bit, both this slide and also the slide before, because some commentators were quick to point out that when Amazon did announce the final location, it was very close to where Jeff Bezos had bought a $20 million mansion before the process even started. So sometimes it's important to think about where the CEO likes to live. Now, expanding on that point around individual choices of where to live, one specific near-term opportunity for Oman might be to attract employees of some of these global firms because they're working remotely, and they will be for some time. I've spoken to several of my friends who work for Google, and in particular, two of them, they've moved to the rural parts of the United States because they want to avoid the high living costs associated with the Bay Area. And I don't see any reason why that could not be Oman. Now, I appreciate there's not many companies with the size of Amazon. And this was 2017. But I just wanted to pull out a couple of examples to show that this is happening at the moment and these opportunities are there. So here's two major investments that have been announced in the last 9 months, despite the challenging year that I think we can all agree we've had. For those of you who don't know, TSMC is a semiconductor manufacturer based in Taiwan and one of the key Apple suppliers. There's obviously a lot more to their choice of Arizona, which I don't think we have time to necessarily debate today with Mr. Trump and his policies. But Dyson, it's a well-known manufacturer of bagless vacuum cleaners. Hopefully everyone recognizes the name, even for those like me who haven't seen the business end of a vacuum cleaner for quite some time. I just want to expand a little bit on that point around Singapore. It's a well-known destination of choice for companies, particularly those wanting to expand into Southeast Asia. And I spent 2 years there recently and I had the opportunity to work very closely with their Economic Development Board. What struck me was their razor focus on specific sectors and the value add companies would bring to their country. It's a country that has virtually no natural resources. In fact, at the point of separation from Malaysia and even until today, they don't have enough natural drinking water sources available. So they rely on imports from Malaysia. So for a country with those limitations to do so well, I think it's fair to say that they've got some of their policies right. Now, I've extracted from their public website, that's the Economic Development Board, just how they position themselves. And you can see here they reiterate just how friendly they are towards business and the diverse talent pool they've got available that they've developed pretty much since the 1960s and 70s. And also that they see themselves as the gateway into the rest of the Asia Pacific. And on the right-hand side is some of the support they offer. And interestingly, some of the most important is those insights and those connections into the country, as well as the normal focus on incentives, which are, again, prioritized based on what is the value add to the country. Now, I mentioned Dyson. That's an example of one of these incentive programs' effectiveness. It started out as a modest R&D lab in 2007 and has progressed now to attracting their global headquarters, which includes their CEO and CFO being based there. A less well-known and anecdotal example is Rolls-Royce, who they chose Singapore as one of their major hubs for their aerospace engineering and particularly the engine overhaul. And the EDB support was specifically referenced in a number of news articles because it was critical to their choosing that location. And that support included development grants, training and support, but most importantly, coordination of Singapore's government agencies that allowed Rolls-Royce to have efficient and focused discussions through the decision process. So what does this mean for Oman? Well, Oman is operating in a very competitive field. Dubai and others, they could be argued to be a little bit further ahead in this area. I'm personally very surprised that so many companies, particularly in the oil and gas, are based there, despite there being no real oil and gas business there. Now, I would also like to acknowledge there are a lot of changes happening, and I don't necessarily have a lot of visibility into those. But I think with the Vision 2040, the direction is very clearly articulated. But it will take some time for those to take full effect. And when I reflected on some of the observations and some of the insights that I've gained through this process, really 3 things struck me. First is that Oman should prioritize which types of businesses that fit with Vision 2040 national priorities, but will also bring the greatest multiplier effect to the local economy. Secondly, actively pursue those companies in the areas of interest. It only takes a few to get some momentum going and start to build the message that Oman is a great place to do business. And as you've seen from the example of Amazon, the benefits can multiply very quickly. And thirdly, the persuasion. Now, here, I think it's important to maximize Oman's existing advantages and be creative. with some of the incentives, given the fiscal position that the country is experiencing. Singapore, for example, with that Rolls-Royce situation, one of the key attractions was they used an old airbase, which had the runway infrastructure and large warehousing available as an opportunity as a business location that Rolls-Royce could use. And anecdotally, that was apparently one of the factors that helped them be persuaded to go there. Now, as I mentioned, obviously this is a very important topic for me. I'm very passionate about it, and I really love working with international businesses and helping them grow. And I particularly enjoy the benefit that has for Oman. But I think one thing that I also came apparent as I was doing the research for this is I've only been here 3 years, and actually probably some of the best ideas and the best views on how to move this forward will come from the people listening today. So I'd like to use the remaining time and some of the Q&A. Normally I understand it's time for you to ask me some very difficult and challenging questions, but I'd actually like to pose a couple back. So, which individuals, companies, or subsectors could be prioritized? And here, people are already thinking about this. The UAE is targeting retirees with longer visas. Finland is targeting tech employees. They're giving them 90-day visas, and they're offering them relocation support. Secondly, what realistic short-term changes would be needed to attract these businesses to Oman? So thank you for your attention, and I'll hand over to Mr. Khalil Al-Balushi to open the dialogue. Would anyone like to start us off?
Thank you very much, Ian. And Mr. Khalil, would you like to take over and start the Q&A session? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ian. Very insightful. Pinpoint to specific things, which is very good. I'm sure that will create a lot of discussion points. But if I may start, since I have the mic now, you talked about incentives, and everyone talks about incentives to attract investors. Now, only this morning I saw about the free zones that we have in Oman. Local capital requirements is nil, 100% foreign ownership. Taxation is for 30 years, no corporate tax, holiday for 30 years, and so on and so on. These are big incentives for anyone to be attracted. But I also read that you have said free zones have been integral part of growth in the Middle East, but with onshore becoming more attractive areas of free zone, are they still relevant? I was wondering why you have mentioned like that in one of your statements.
Sure, thank you, Khalil, and very relevant question. I think if I just expand a little bit about the reshoring, I think the theme that was emerging is tied very much to the protectionism and resilience. So what companies have learned is that the just-in-time and very lean supply chains have been exposed a little bit from the recent crisis. And there's these two driving factors of increasing regulation, increasing pressure from governments for their own countries to be given priority. America is a good example, but also then just companies' own requirement to be resilient, because otherwise their end customers and will be disappointed. So I think the opportunity, it requires incentive to ensure the companies come to Oman, but I'll draw back to that point about making sure that the focus and the limited resources that are available are directed to those that will actually have the multiplier effect on the local economy. I'm not a public policy expert, so I can't speak with any authority on the relative benefits of free zones, and anything that will help promote competitiveness and trade are generally accepted to be a good thing. But personally, this is a very personal view, I've always questioned their value.
Very interesting, because at least in this region and in Oman, of course, we have now a public authority only for free zones. So we are giving importance to it just for attracting investment, basically, and they are running around to get investors in, and a lot of them are really working well. So it is very interesting, intriguing comments from your side. I think we'll open the comments from for the floor. Riham.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Khalil. We'll listen to Mr. Mike Hansen. Mr. Mike, please go ahead.
Thank you, Riham. Thank you, Mr. Khalil. Thank you, Khalil, and thank you, Ian, very much. I'd actually like to build on what Khalil was just talking about. So the free zones have been positioned to help attract. And as Mr. Khalil has said, an enormous amount of effort has been given towards reaching out to companies around the region, around the world, to attract them to come here, Sohar, Duqm, Salalah particularly. But in your experience, Ian, and particularly Singapore and the gateway to Southeast Asia, I have long understood and believed in the very valuable advantages Oman has through its physical location. And it just gets better and better because of our leadership, our relationships with all countries, markets, accessibility. But I'm interested in the notes I've made. I'm trying to get the short list of the vital needs a multinational business would have to ground its business. So you mentioned the CEO, you mentioned CFO, so I guess senior leadership is pretty much at the top of the list. If you're going to move to Singapore, as Dyson did from the UK, I guess it must be pretty straightforward that they knew that their senior leadership would have some permanence in that country. That's one. But what about ownership of land or ownership of building? Because maybe building on what you were saying, a free zone is in a location. So these days, with the internet, with technology, anything that binds us or holds us is something that we're fighting against. For example, probably in this forum today, there's some of us in Muscat, there may be some of us in Sur, there may be some of us in Sifa, there may be some of us, but we're not restricted. We do business virtually as well as face-to-face. So what would be the 3 or 4 absolute essentials that an MNC is looking for to say,
sure,
I'm going to go and be based in that region to do my business? So in our case, to do business from Oman with the Indian Ocean Rim countries.
Sure, Mike, it's a great question. I think I've posed this a little bit to the small number of people I'm speaking to, and it's obviously that's something I have to highlight is a little bit anecdotal. It's not a genuinely statistical survey, but the themes were quite consistent. So number one, talent, and actually talent trumps cost, which I think comes a little bit back to incentives and the free zones. Second is the clarity around law and being treated fairly. And that expands a little bit into labor regulation, and really that leads on to the third point, which is it has to be compatible with multinational business models. Because I can speak from example with HSBC, we have limitations in Oman in what we can offer because we're not able to fully use some of the software we've developed globally because it's cloud-based. We have particular expertise in certain areas, and those pockets might be in a different country, but we have difficulty accessing it from here. Now, those are from a business perspective. If you ask the individuals, because I think it's important that the market is attractive. Now, I love Oman. I think it's a fantastic place to live. It's the best place I've lived in so far. And I think we have to play a little bit more to some of those strengths, particularly around the natural environment. But I think, again, some investment in maximizing those and making facilities and the outdoor culture, which is a big part of Oman, I think could go a long way.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you.
I can see, Mike, there's been a couple of questions asked in the chat box, so maybe I'll pick up on those. So,
Ian, can I ask one question, please? Anil Lahore.
Sure, Neil.
Thanks. Most of the government investment in future will be through public privatization. Think as government has already created the necessary infrastructures, and they hope now private sectors to take the lead into the new line of businesses. And looking at the constraint on the government resources of the funds, it's the right thing to do. But could you tell us from what government should do something extra to attract the private sectors for these kind of investment, so that a right message goes to the government also that what is required further to be done?
Thanks, Anil. That's it's a straightforward question, but I think quite a complicated answer, because a lot of it comes down to, again, I'm speaking from my own experience of fundraising for project finance, of which, Anil, I'm sure you have a lot more. Really, the key thing comes down to, if I think about sort of, the factors where the government actually has control over, because it would be, wishful thinking to say we'll get a AAA credit rating. That's not going to happen. So if I try to focus a little bit more on where the control or where the opportunities are, one of the biggest things comes back to the point around rule of law and equality. So a lot of these deals, they rely on the trust that if something goes wrong, there's a fair outcome. And I think that's something that the government does have control over, and I think that could be a good place to start. I've not had enough experience of myself to really comment on how that is viewed, and I think maybe some of the international law firms might be a little bit better placed in terms of specific measures that can be done around that. And I think the second point would be around making sure that Oman's on the map, because if I reflect on some of the conversations I've had, when I say I work for HSBC in Oman, if I'm talking to investors, if I'm talking to other lenders, I sometimes still get the question, where's Oman? Is that in Dubai? So a little bit around building the profile of the country, not necessarily buying Newcastle United, although I'd obviously be very happy with that outcome.
Thank you so much. That's perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Anil. And then there's a question just on taxation is expected to grow in the industrial sector. What would be your recommendation for tax credit scheme in Oman? Would this make a difference to attract international business? I'll reframe that question if it's okay, because I think this comes back a little bit to what I was discussing with the FTSE 100 CEO yesterday. I think incentives can be used to drive the national priorities. So things like that, I think, can be used to target making sure that Omani hiring is prioritized. I think it's one of those situations where that is a potential tool available. So I don't necessarily see that as a problem. And I think companies accept that. Now, if I take a step back and look globally at the situation, there's a lot of competition for capital. So that the firms that will be looking to invest here, they have a lot of options of where they could go. So really, it's about seeing how Oman, how it levels against some of these other countries, but also looking a little bit further into where are some of those specific opportunities. And if I look at the Gulf, there are challenges around nationalization, but I think that can be then turned into a potential advantage if it's structured the right way, because Omanization is not a problem. I think the feedback I've had from firms is that it's the ability to right size the workforce in times of trouble or ensure that underperformers can be replaced. But I would also, sorry, Khalil, yeah.
No, this point is very interesting. This nationalization is not a deal breaker and Omanization is not a problem, because that was always the stereotype that was going around. But can we listen from Simon, please, Abu Karam? What's your views on that?
Yeah, with pleasure. Thank you very much. First of all, I must thank Ian. After 9 months of confinement in our country, it's good that he's taking us back to the international scene. He made us travel and think from very high and then go down to our specifics. It's a great experience. I think what my take from the talk is this, and it's so important. It's amazing, actually. But we have things to do in Oman in preparation for that. First of all, we have to be all convinced of the benefits of international business. Even people like ourselves have not considered in such detail what are the benefits. And this is where we voted for them. I selected make more money, of course, become more efficient, provide, innovation and technology. So we have to be, all of us, convinced of the benefits, and therefore give international business a priority. In 2040, in the 5-year plan, in our talks, in any economic problem, we cannot ignore the benefits of international business. Once we are convinced, and this is, I'm going through the sequence of the presentation, which is very professional, then the selection of location. We have to forget a little bit, 5 minutes, that we are Omanis and we are big decision makers to locate our companies. Why would we be interested in Oman? And the factors have been described. We have to look at labor, cost, business climate, and community. And I think, as outsider this time, have an objective analysis of the elements of labor and see where is our weakness and where is our strength. In cost, the same thing. Talent matters more than cost, fine. Business climate, we have to know ourselves and be convinced of where we're strong in these 4 and where we are weak, and start improving where we are weak. 2, create a location or a possible location, potentially that big companies select us. And why do we want to do that? Because we are convinced of the benefits. The 2 are linked. And finally, once we rectify or we adjust or we create what is specific to our location, and this is, I think, where we have lots of work to do, is to pick, prioritize, and not scatter, and persuade. And the word persuade lead me to think of a big gap that we have, which is marketing. I think it's an area where really we don't do much effort in marketing at all. A friend of mine from a brotherly country, Lebanon, he came here and he said, in Isra, he said some countries, and he opened his arms little, and he said they have that much and they market that much, and he opened his arms very wide. You guys don't be offended, but you have that much, opening his arms very wide, and you are marketing that little bit. So if we take this subject seriously as economic planners about the international business, and we go through being convinced of the benefits, and then seeing why our location should be preferred or considered by others, and then we pick, prioritize, and try to persuade, I think we would have cracked it. We'd be on the right track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. Mr. Ian, do you have any comment on that?
Thank you, Simon. I really appreciate the feedback, and I think you've highlighted a really important point, which I was trying to differentiate is, that there's a lot of work going on at the minute, and there's a lot of positive change coming. But I think actually there's a lot of opportunity there for Oman to be proactive. Again, it can't necessarily be everything to everyone, but if there were a couple of firms, we could really come together as a community here and actually, work together to do that. For example, HSBC has a very strong network. We have corporates all over the world. We can easily speak to decision makers. If we know the profile of the types of companies, we can help facilitate introductions. That's exactly what a bank like HSBC can contribute.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of resources available. I said this, the pick, prioritize, and persuade. I have this problem as HSBC. I'm competing against people like Bank Muscat, Oman Arab Bank. I can't compete with them on the same terms because they're much bigger than me. They have much more flexibility. They have, different ways of competing. So I have to be very focused. And then when I'm razor focused on the firms that I want to go after, then it's about getting in there and it's using the decision makers. So I'm not afraid to use my CEO. I'm not afraid to use my regional senior management to help help approach a company. And, the Oman could think the same way. Just to plant a seed, if the Sultan contacted Jeff Bezos, where could that lead to? I don't know.
May I add something, because you talked, for example, is it my turn? Can I go ahead? Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
yes.
You picked up a very good observation whereby international companies who have big interest in Oman, such as big oil companies, upstream and downstream, and they are not established in Muscat. Let me add to it, even where we have the upper hand, when we have the upper hand, we are not doing much effort to establish that. I'll give examples, if I may. We signed contract for several billion of dollars with companies, whether to build Dukum or to build Liwa Plastic or whatever. And for each project of these huge EPC contracts, you have a project office. And even that office is not in Oman. I mean, for God's sake, look, and this is, I'm blaming ourselves as Omanis, where we have the upper hand, at least to try to impose in a way that, look, at least the project office, I know of an example, for example, in for the crude oil facility, the office is in Abu Dhabi. There's about 200 families working for Oman, being paid by Oman, including 30 Omanis, and they are not established in Oman. So there are areas where we have the upper hand, where we have to intervene and make sure we attract them here. And little by little, as you said, choose one or two, concentrate on them and get them into Oman. Thank you.
May I have the floor, Rehan?
Thank you very much.
Abdulaziz.
Yes, Mr. Abdulaziz, please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ian, for your interesting arguments. My comment is, I think That presentation did not really it talks about international business in general, of course, and trying to focus on Oman, shed light on your experience with Singapore and other places, of course. When it comes to Oman, we always try to compare with Dubai, with Singapore, with others. I think we should really focus on what we are good at, what we can offer, and what we can provide for the international business ecosystem to make Oman more attractive for them. I believe what has been said by some participants in terms of marketing, we're not marketing Oman in a proper way to make others come forward. There are rules for the government, of course, to play, and there are rules for the private businesses. I believe the local businesses are more focusing on local issues. And for them, it is local businesses means mainly either retail or government projects. Other than that, they showed no interest yet or aggressiveness in terms of trying to attract FDI. And when you see the experience in the past 30 years, the attractiveness of the private sector in Oman in associating themselves with the international business, it's mainly related to a government project. So again, we are going to the government. Wherever it goes to a government. Now, I believe the Oman Vision 2040, they have set priorities and they have found that we are good at 5 sectors. So I believe the focus should be on those 5 sectors and prioritize the sectors and try to work on all of these sectors together. However, I would put a question mark when it comes to the readiness. Are we ready? We should not wait to be ready, of course, but whenever there's an opportunity or a business that is showed readiness in terms of infrastructure to attract FDI, we should be immediately cultivating those low-hanging fruits. And just to give you an example, you mentioned HSBC has a very good, by the way, I'm a banker, maybe you don't know me, and I'm from Oman Development Bank. You mentioned that HSBC has a lot of things to offer. However, we could not offer it because we cannot use the cloud. I believe those issues can be resolved with the Central Bank of Oman using the cloud. Probably, if you mean that the system here, the regulation does not allow using a cloud to use some business intelligence or import data, this is not really an issue that can be. You have ways and means to work over that. What I think as a banker, as an economist, I think we lack the infrastructure of the whole financial system. By infrastructure, I mean, I don't mean to copycat Dubai or Singapore to become a financial center. Maybe we are not, we cannot do much on that at this point in time, but we need to have the minimum financial institutions that will drive the international business. Right now in Oman, we mainly, if you look at the map of banking, it's HSBC that is only exists as an international bank. But it is as you say, you think your slogan, you think international, but you work local. This is what HSBC in Oman is becoming more of another retail bank rather than a bank that is driving investment and foreign direct investment or working on it. If we need anything as a government from here, you will direct us to go to your Dubai office or go to your, in the old days, maybe Bahrain office, or in the older days, maybe Beirut office, and so on and so on. I think now you're mainly depending on some support from all over. Of course, the world is global now, but what I'm saying that we do need the minimum existence of a financial center. Maybe it might not be a financial center per se, but an international financial services that does not really exist. And you can see that even when we go for a government bond issue or sukuk issue, we always borrow the knowledge and the experience from the nearby markets or nearby financial centers. Of course, they have already put this infrastructure requirement of a financial center ahead of us, ahead of time. However, I believe to create a business, you do need to have the minimum financial services at place, especially when it comes to advisory, to mobilizing resources, whether locally or internationally, and so on. So I do really have an interest in probably meeting you and probably talk more on these issues. Thanks to Khalil for making this happen. I think Majlis Al-Khonji should have a series of this type of talk, because a time limit of 1 hour for such an important issue is really not enough. Probably I would recommend to Khalil maybe once a month to talk on these issues. And we today is the start of this series of how to make Oman vibrant, to make it more attractive. Thank you.
Exactly, this is very important. That's why we have a long list of interested people to comment. So we'll take a comment from you, Ian, and then listen to some.
Apology, Mahmoud, for being long. Thank you.
No problem.
Sure. Thank you, Aziz. Absolutely delighted for any opportunity to meet. I'll see if I can find a way just to share my details. I think you're right, and I'd just pick up specifically on the point around HSBC's headquarters being in Dubai. I guess the point around that is let's say the advisory expertise is probably there because that's where the quantum of deals are at the moment. And I spoke to some of the senior management in advance of this about this because, again, very roughly, I think around 20% of our employees in Dubai are doing regional jobs. Why can't they be in Oman?
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of, those are the questions that we can be asking and what can we be doing. But I think it's also a kind of, it's chicken and egg, and it's like you say, to have a vibrant financial sector is important. But you need the opportunities happening here to bring people in. So it's not an easy solution.
Good.
Thanks, Khalil.
Yeah, thank you. And can we hear from Dr. Talal, please? You're raising hands.
Yeah, thank you, Khalil, and thank you, Anne, and to Majlis Al-Khonji as well. It's a very interesting topics. I had the opportunity to work at multi-international places, and I've seen how the bankers moving from retail concept to the international investment. But my questions here now, we have witnessed a momentum on green financing from international bankers, international community. I don't know how you see Oman in this domain. Can Oman be considered as a platform for such green financing and to attract those funds into the ecosystem that fit with the Oman 2040? This is my main question, and thank you again for the excellent presentation.
Thank you, Tal. Sustainability is a massive opportunity. Again, if I talk a little bit around investors' appetite, there is huge liquidity out there because ESG, which is the environmental social governance, is becoming more and more important topic. So the pools of funds that are available are increasing. Is Oman a potential destination for some of that liquidity? Absolutely. I think that's exactly what the efforts around sustainable finance are for. It's to support these kind of opportunities. And it doesn't have to be big multi-$100-million deals. There is support available for the small changes that will also add up. And an example of this would be, and Neil messaged me about it the other day, HSBC, we've put some solar panels above our car park. Now that qualifies for a specific type of green financing. Obviously HSBC can't give a loan to itself, but you'll permit me the example. So absolutely. And I think it's something that for businesses that see it as a priority, it's something they should actually absolutely be thinking about when setting their financial strategy.
That's good, because when we talk about Singapore as an example of focusing in specific areas, that could be an opportunity for Oman. Can we listen to Dr. Muhammad, please?
Thank you, Mr. Khalil. Thank you, Ian, for your distinguished presentation. It's really useful to me. Now, when we talk about multinational companies, what I think it's location and reallocation, so it moves like mobile. And according to Mr. Simon and Mr. Aziz Al-Hanai, I think there are chances, opportunities for Oman to attract big companies like multinational companies. But for me, actually, I'll go direct to the question. My question nowadays, the mileage, it's not a big problem. I mean, for the multinational companies. But maybe the legal framework or maybe the legal stringencies could be significant in attracting the multinational. And my question is about the medium enterprises, because we know most of the multinational companies, they rely on many tasks by medium enterprises, medium companies, for their services, for multiplier effect, as you mentioned in your slides. So based on your experience, what's the role of medium enterprises and what's the role of the government to support and to incentivize maybe, or maybe to easing the activities of the medium enterprises to attract the multinational companies? So it's like a bidirectional effect from the government to the medium enterprises, and how the medium enterprises could attract more of these multinational companies. And thank you again for your nice presentation.
Thank you, Mohammed. It's a very searching question. It's it's a fair one, and I think I'll point to two things. So I grew up in the northeast of the UK, and for those that don't know, obviously during the 80s and 90s, it lost a lot of the industries that existed there, and the majority of the jobs were from public sector. So actually, there was very little opportunity for private employment. But the UK government helped attract Nissan to set up quite a large manufacturing facility in Sunderland. And it is very much the only major private employer in that area in a very deprived part of the UK. But actually, it comes back to that point around the multiplier effect, because as you correctly say, actually, although Nissan got a lot of incentives, and I'm sure got some very attractive tax breaks to be based there, a lot of the real additional jobs came in the supply chain to Nissan. So a lot of the associated production parts or the services ancillary to it, whether it's the haulage firm bringing the goods into the country from the docks into the factory area, whether it's the HR recruitment process, so you have search firms, all of these kind of associated benefits. So I think it comes back to looking at maybe sectors, which the government has done through those 5 priority areas, but kind of taking it to that next level. So which companies, and then where can you have those, and start. It might have to start with a kind of a lower level in the hierarchy, but over time you can build that out. But again, it comes back to making sure that there is a good talent pool available. The government can help with training. And some of the investment could go, and again, this is if we get a big company who says, I'm very much open to setting up let's say a large manufacturing facility. Let's take the Rolls-Royce example. Working with the local universities to bring some of their expertise in, so that the engineers coming out are trained and ready to go into that. And that's how you build that global competitiveness. Now that's quite a specific example. Again, I apologize. I'm not a sort of public policy expert, so it's kind of it's a little bit of an anecdotal example. But I think it comes back to, again, just making sure that the business climate here is one, it's even, so it's a level playing field. But it's also that point around competition. So allowing natural competition. At first, it will be a little bit difficult, but then over time, it will allow the enhancement that's available. But that competition, it's like the medicine. Too much of a dose and it's a poison. So it's something that has to be balanced.
That's good. Talking about labor, it is one of the main things where drives the selection of these big companies. And talking about labor and upskilling people, we would like to hear from Warith, who is Mr. Warith, who is very much involved in upskilling the young Omanis. Mr. Warith, please.
Thank you, Al Khalil, and thank you, Ian, and thank you, Khalil, Your Excellency Khalil Al Khonji. Actually, these sort of sessions are crucially important in this kind of time. We need to diversify for sure, but we have to be very creative. And I think what we've had today was a very insightful and thought-provoking session. I think there's a lot of good things that are happening in Oman, and I think the 2040 vision is very, very clear. And it's got the 5 pillars or 6 pillars, whatever they have, I mean, quite a number. And many areas have been sort of prioritized for really further development, particularly like logistics and a few other things. But I think what's lacking is this, is that although you have the focus areas and there's a lot of interest with international organizations, etc., but when it comes to fast-tracking decisions or the incentives, the incentives there are published, but how to actually activate those incentives are sometimes very, very difficult. So I think there's a lot of dynamics in terms of getting things done, but then you get blocked. The reason is that there are sort of a lot of bureaucracy around silos that they're not talking to each other. It may be a good thing for the country as a whole, but on a sort of local basis, you are actually suffocated because basically you can't move on to the next direction or to the decision makers. So accessibility to decision makers, accessibility to fast tracking of whatever the incentives are. For example, you have Sainsbury today, which is actually going it's actually setting up in Sohar. Surely, when they land, they need a lot of talent. Surely, they need supply chain professionals. Surely, they need a lot of logisticians. But what's happening on the ground now to enable us to facilitate Sainsbury, when they do land in Sohar, they've got all these professionals, talented Omani individuals. What will happen is that Sainsbury wants to set up, but then the talent is not aligned to their element, and they'll be expected that Sainsbury actually develop those supply chains of good talents. Now we know, and I think we've heard about proactiveness here, is that we got to be proactive ourselves and say, right, okay, Sainsbury as an international and sort of investment is coming into Oman. How can we go and facilitate Sainsbury with minimal interruption that they get what they want? So I think it should be the other way around. They've made an investment, they said, well, we're coming to Sohar. I think it is left up to us now, Omanis, to say, okay, what can we do to really make them sort of effective on the day one that they actually land? So anyway, long story short, talent, I believe, takes a long time to develop. And so the example here is that, again, I said Sohar, it will take another year or two before we can actually enable them to have the right talent. So as soon as we get a decision like that, or even before the decision, we only have to start working on the talent, vocationally effective individuals. We've got to get them onto the ground. So I think, Khalil, thank you for that. I know it's a bit long-winded, but it's something passionate in my thing is that we do a lot of initiatives, but those initiatives don't go forward.
Yes, well, that's good. I think we should not wait for Sainsbury to come here and then prepare people. We should be prepared now for the Rolls-Royce and Sainsbury's and whoever wants to come. Can we hear from somebody who has seen a lot of changes over the years, Saadat Khamis?
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you for the very comprehensive. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for very comprehensive, interesting proposal. I think you emphasize on experience of Singapore and experience of Dubai as a model that you think the country should follow. However, I think post-corona, we have to be very careful because most of the communication will be changed. As you mentioned, that will be mostly virtual. So with that kind of changes, maybe what we need to emphasize in Oman, I like the point you raised that it's a good climate. The 4 point of, you mentioned the cost and you talk about the labor, the cost, the business climate, the community, and all in those you have been very positive. You little bit was worried about the communication with international market, and you bit not sure about the mindset. The mindset of money, maybe it is inward, and you want the mindset to be mostly outward. We are totally agree with you. I think in the coming 10 years, we may not see there a country have a specific privilege to be attractive as a center of attractive of investment, because everything in the world will be changed. Let's wait till 2021 when we see the closure of the account of most of the economies in the world, which have been locked down for almost a year. Then we'll see the entire world is in auction. The changes of business maybe will hit badly, even those two pretty center cities which you mentioned. So I think post-corona, with a virtual communication, we are well established in Oman to start a very good start. I think, and I do agree that we need a financial center in the country, because that will make things easier for most of the talent to work. Do we have good quality of people? I disagree with the people who say, no, we don't have. I think you have said in the beginning that we have a talented Omanis here, and it's easy to train them in short time and get a very good quality of people where we can take the country and take the economy and take the business to second stage. I impressed by most of the comment you have said so far. And I think I agree with you. Communication through cloud and other should be done easily for the businessman. And in this country, from our experience as a businessman and also in the other part when I was in the government, everything is achievable. But you have to raise it in the certain level. If that issue with the HSBC was an issue, I'm 100% sure the people in the central bank and other Minister of Finance will listen to that and make the changes available for you. We have examined that and tested that so many times. If there is anything will slow down the growth of economy, they will remove it for sure. Thank you again. I think let's wait till 2021 and see the outcome of the accounting in the world and see what is happening. I am very bullish on 2021 as operation, especially after seeing that a lot of potential of political stability in the world and more opening in terms of the trade as a freedom of trade. So I think that 2021-22 will be a good year. In the beginning of that, we'll see the impact of 2020 as a closure of account. Thank you very much.
Over to you, Ian.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a fantastic insights, and I think just to pick up on one of the points is I've obviously referenced Singapore and Dubai in the discussion today, but I don't think Singapore and Dubai are the model that Oman should follow. Oman should have its own model, and I think it should play to its advantages that it has. And I think it's for Oman to decide what they are. And it's as you can see, I'm very passionate about this topic, so I could continue speaking all afternoon about it. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and I think I'll maybe pick up separately around the points about some of the limitations for HSBC. It's fairly anecdotal. I'm sure the discussions are happening with Central Bank of Oman.
Can we go to Mr. Richard, please? Any comments from your side, sir?
Yes, thank you so much for including me in this discussion. A couple points in more just comments, and from my background, I typically, when facing problems, look at the facts, and then in my line of work, have to come up with a recommended solution pretty quickly. I understand that obviously different sectors work different ways, but just a couple of notes that I've noted. And not to beat the Dubai and Singapore comparison, but I think Oman is unique, and Oman playing to its strengths or determining its comparative advantages, especially in the short term, could be beneficial. Oman is not going to outdo or out Dubai. Oman is not going to out Singapore. But things that Oman has that are real comparative advantages include the tourism sector, the natural sector, as Ian had mentioned, and also near and dear to my line of work is the logistics and transshipment network. The geographic realities exist. If Oman can make it financially feasible for international shipping companies to have no reason to go inside the Arabian Gulf, but to drop off their goods at either one of your three amazing ports at Sohar, Duqm, or Salalah, and there's an established and potentially upfront, you may have to subsidize it, feeder ship system that is more efficient for those shipments to happen than those international shipping companies going into the Gulf themselves, then you create an opportunity there where the business sense, the risks of increased maritime insurance, those decisions no longer go away. This is unfortunately an unstable region, in Oman is an oasis of peace and stability. So I think that's one area. With regards to the tourism, I think there might be an opportunity, and I would second what Ian has said. When I'm speaking to my counterparts in other parts of the world, a lot of times I have to say that I work in Muscat, Oman, because some of them that are not very worldly will say, "Oh, yes, I've heard of Oman, Jordan," and I say, "No, it's Muscat, Oman. We are nowhere near the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan." So I think a marketing campaign to capitalize on the pent up tourism that will likely come after the COVID vaccine starts getting distributed would be an area, and I don't know what the exact timing is. We've seen the recent announcements from Pfizer, but I think people who have means will probably start traveling perhaps this coming summer or this next fall. And there is going to be, I was reading an article yesterday talking about the haircuts that people have missed. It's almost like the trips or the Christmas trips or the summer vacations that people have missed. That money is in people's bank accounts. In some instances, it has not been spent and is pent up. It's money that is getting, that's on the shelf, ready to spend. So perhaps opportunity for Oman is to really posture itself for the post-COVID tourism bump that is likely going to come. People are going to get out of Europe, America, other locations, and want to go out. And Oman's got a comparative advantage here of having wide open spaces. You go to Jabal Akhtar, Jabal Shams, you don't have to worry about social distancing because it's part of the routine. Same with going out to some of your ocean going adventures. So just a couple comments from my perspective, both on Oman focusing on its undeniable comparative advantages in the the outdoor tourism sector, and then the logistics and transshipments of making that really not make it such a difficult argument for folks to want to push their ships into the Arabian Gulf, and you could have a very successful feeder line. I know one exists right now, but it doesn't work at the capacity and at the frequency that would need to supplant folks going into there. And there could be a tremendous knock-on benefit for Oman being seen as a transshipment location for the Gulf, almost as Salalah is seen as a transshipment location for goods going into Yemen and in Eastern Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That's an area very close to my heart. I could talk about it until evening. But we will not. With regard to the country profile and promoting I would like to believe that we are on the right track. We have changed or the government have changed the Ministry of Commerce name and added investment promotion. So I hope that that will work on that direction of promoting the country outside. Can we have Muhammad Ruzeqi?
I think he left.
Dr. Muhammad left.
He left. Yeah.
Then Abir Sultan.
I think she's not ready. We can move
to Mr. Amr Suleimani.
Mr. Amr, are you there? Can you hear us? Okay, His Excellency Khamis is raising his hand again. Mr. Khamis, do you have any question? I think he's not ready as well. So over to you, Mr. Khalil.
Maybe can we have Mr. Bikram Rishi? Do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Khalil. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Your Excellency, for having me here today. I think it'll be, I work at HSBC, and one of the great things about HSBC is that it can bring a lot of learning to what's going to happen in the future, because it's seen it in other markets. And two things which we are going to see is the introduction of VAT, and of course, possible introduction of income tax in 2022. There are models, and I'm sure you've seen it in the region. And of course, in terms of attracting companies here, how do you see these playing out? Has introduction of VAT sort of sorted out the issue of saying, okay, fine, there is a tax, and we don't really mind as long as it's cost of doing business? And what about the income tax impact of attracting, like you said, talent is more important than cost. So how will that help the country?
Sure, thanks, Bikram. I'll just start. I kind of, as a banker, we usually when clients mention tax to us, I run a mile and refer them to one of the big four and their tax advisors. So it's not one of my strong points in terms of corporate taxation, but I think just a couple of points on VAT. So yes, we have seen it introduced in other GCC markets. I think while there was some disruption in terms of demand side impact. In some ways, the lead up to the introduction of VAT obviously promoted demand, but some of the associated benefits with the introduction, it was not necessarily on the direct fiscal position of the country. It was in, bringing, almost pushing companies towards electronic ways of doing business. And it was one of those sort of key factors that's really given visibility to places like Dubai in terms of what's happening, and it removes some of the lost economy, if you know what I mean, in terms of some of the cash transactions that happen in the background. That's one point. But obviously, from a banking perspective, what we did see is that it impacted companies because it increased their requirements for working capital, because the cash difference between you know, when they were accounting for the VAT and claiming it back from the government, you know, there was a difference. So, you know, that was one direct impact. So, leaving aside, again, I'm you know, unashamedly sort of dodging the question on the corporate side, but coming back to the personal side, I think that's an interesting point. I have discussed this with a couple of companies here, and I think the view is relatively negative because it comes back to the competition. You know, you've got other countries in the near vicinity where the tax is not there. So when people are looking at it from a cost-benefit perspective, particularly for some of these big decision makers, you know, that could be a deal breaker. But then offset that again, and I'm trying not to keep referencing Singapore, so I'll use maybe Hong Kong this time. You know, Hong Kong's an attractive destination for expat decision makers, but they still have a 15% individual tax rate as well. So it's, you know, it's not a deal breaker, but I think it's one part of a wider proposition. And if the other parts of the proposition are there, then it can come further down. But it really draws back to that, you know, which groups are you trying to attract? You know, which individuals, which kinds of decision makers in which sectors. And if I may, if you permit, just very quickly, I'm pretty conscious of time, we take the retirees. Andrew Long, CEO of HSBC for 6 years here in Oman, you know, he's recently retired. You know, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that, you know, he has, you know, he splits his time between the UK and Hong Kong. Now, Oman is naturally in the middle of those. So I guess, you know, could there be a situation where he could consider spending time in Oman? Possibly. Would that be positive for the local economy? I think so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bikram. Can we go to Hamda Shamsi? Any comments from
No, thank you. Thank you. Nothing from my side. Enjoying the presentation though. Thanks, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Lots of thought-provoking topics coming up. Yeah. Is there anything from Abir? Is Abir?
I think she left the Majlis. Yes. His Excellency Khamis, you have any question?
Yes, in fact, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. What I want to say that in the last 4 decades, the experience of Singapore, Dubai was very impressive. I believe, and I agree with most of the comments today, that we need to have our own experience, our own direction. So far, the reason why Singapore was there or other country was there because mainland China and other big markets. Today, none of this market need a mediator. So we will see a lot of changes in the coming 10 years that most of the business will be done direct. But we need to be prepared to be main player in this direct business rather than imitation to what is there in the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mike, please, would you like to take over?
Thank you, Reham. I'd just like to build on a couple of points that Richard was highlighting, and just to try and concentrate some of our thoughts based on your customer base, Ian. So if you look closer to home, let's put Singapore aside and our region. And at the macro level, some of the big changes that may be coming in the coming 1 year, medium term, is probably a new major logistics capability from China by road or by rail through to Pakistan to the port of Gwadar. What opportunity are you seeing from your 250 customers? What sectors are they in? What clusters? What do they do? And particularly in the last 18 months, 2 years, what new customers have, what sectors have they come from, and why have they chosen Oman? Are any linked to possible emerging opportunity from this Chinese supply chain, which I hear product from China could be in Pakistan in 3 to 4 days, from Gwadar across to, let's say, Sohar in 2 days, 3 days, and accessibility into UAE, Saudi, and the Northern Gulf, a real game changer. So I'm interested, given you are HSBC is the preeminent international bank here in Oman. What players might be coming here to seek to be at the end of that supply chain to get access to Oman and to the other countries of the lower Gulf, please?
Thanks, Mike. It's again very topical for HSBC given our presence over in Asia Pacific. So the connectivity with Asia, we are seeing an outward view because there are lots of opportunities from those markets. But also, I think it's that when I look at the world trade map and some of the presentations that we do, those cross flows, it all seems to route via the Middle East. So, taking your questions directly in terms of that link with China, I don't think anyone's looking at that today. So it's not something that's necessarily probably well seen outside of those in maybe the logistics side or who know Oman very well. I think Sainsbury's is a great example, and particularly given if you're talking about a reduction in time for transport, then you suddenly open up different types of consumables. So the food and produce like that, it's potentially fresher, and food security is a massive agenda for all of the Middle Eastern governments. If you look at most of the plans, they'll tend to have food security in there because it's a national priority. So that's one point. And then just coming to the what businesses am I seeing? They're primarily linked to the existing business climate here in Oman. So very heavy exposure to oil and gas and associated services, and then also to the contracting side as well.
Okay, so that's the sort of answer. I know Ian quite well, everyone, so please forgive me, but that's exactly the sort of answer that I expected to come from him. So number one, if no one is looking at this supply chain, there is the opportunity for us here in Oman. This is number one. And His Excellency Qais Al Yusuf, MOCI and IP, what a great opportunity, because anyone can do the maths. On a train or by road from China through Pakistan, which is not the Pakistan of the last 5 or 10 years. You talk to some of the Pakistani people, gentlemen in this country, and they talk of a country where the currency is starting to come up. It's a much safer, it's a much more accessible, it's a much better place to do business. And linked with China, Oman, with its friendship, its proximity, you can't put a bridge between Pakistan and Oman. It has to be by sea. So we're at the front end. We are vital to creating value for that supply chain into the countries of the GCC. And frankly, if we're good at transshipment, right down into East Africa. So this is number one. The second point, if I may, and building on, again, and it's really helpful in having your platform of points of benefits of innovation, efficiency, but the importance of data security, 5G, artificial intelligence. But another sector that we need to be really serious about here in Oman, and given the Omani youth we have and their frankly fantastic asset of many who have studied abroad and come back here and wish to participate in the private sector, but doing business in education hubbed here in Oman must be a massive opportunity because it's a safe country. We should be able to have homegrown educators, faculty. We should be able to attract, if we have the right relationships with, for example, a top-class university from India. If we are able to market effectively a combination of international curriculum at affordable, accessible prices, there are so many people from Africa. There are so many people from our side of, or from the eastern side of the Indian Ocean that need access to education. Is not going to go away. Education is probably going to become more important with the combination of technology in the future. And I just suggest that from your presentation today, that actually you give us more impetus for opportunity tomorrow, and we should be undertaking it now through PPP with particularly MOCI and IP and some of the other very valuable partners we have in Oman, such as Port of Sohar particularly, and connecting and doing big business in a big way. And just like His Excellency Kamas was saying, but we need to remove obstacles. We need to get things done, and it's not a long shopping list. Most of the valuable components are here in this country at the moment. But thank you for this opportunity to comment. I need help, Khalil.
Is anybody who raised the hand?
Yes, I will add one more thing.
Abdulaziz raised his hand. تفضل ابو عاصم بعد ابو عاصم.
لا بعدك
ابدا والله عشان ما تقطع حبل افكار ايان كان يخاطبك.
Well, I agree with the sectors. Education is very, very important, and logistics, supply chain is very, very important. The country is ready. We have 4 free zones, maybe more. We have 40 kilometers of high quality of road, 40,000 kilometers. We have numbers of good international airports. We have over 40,000 people, new graduates from universities around the world. I think we have all the infrastructure, which we need to go more of good sectors that can be Oman as a base. But I will add also, additional to education, I think health can be also one of the sector which we should take care of. We have a clean environment, healthy areas, beautiful beaches. So we are ready for any kind of good health, hospitals, medication centers, and so on. Shukran.
تفضل عبد العزيز.
محمود تسمعني؟
نسمعك نعم.
Thank you, Ian. I think we have talked about so many things today. Probably we did not focus on a single particular issue, but we talked about the ecosystem of Oman to attract FDIs and to create to make Oman as a hub for international businesses. I think what we need to do, if there is any sessions, of course, this is with the permission of Abu Abdullah Khalil Khonji, probably with more focus, because it would be difficult to talk on all issues and come out with little. I mean, let me just talk about the issues raised by some of the participants, that many expat seniors at the various sectors, they live here, they like Oman, they talk about Oman positively, like Ian did. I know his ex-boss Andrew retired in Oman, maybe Malika, the new boss, will retire in Oman, maybe Ayan will retire in Oman. But when it comes to living in Oman, you will see the families are located in Dubai, and the senior CEO will commute every weekend to Dubai. there's a reason for that. The reason is the availability of services that we may lack. So we cannot continue to say that we are ready, that we have everything, I believe we do lack certain issues to make Muscat attractive for many expats. So far, we are not yet there. Definitely, those gaps has to be felt. When it comes to making Muscat is a beautiful city, as Ian said, as many participants said, but we need to create a place. So place-making concept to make Oman visible for those who like to live here. And definitely Singapore was that kind of a city, if you want to have it as a reference. Bahrain was not surprisingly one of those cities that was attractive for foreign, because when I decide to locate in a different country, there are so many things that I need to take into consideration before I take that decision. The family, the education, the healthcare, the whatever, entertainment, and so on. I'm not saying Oman lacking the basics. No, we do have the basics, but probably we need to fill those gaps to make Oman more attractive for expats, especially the higher level of expats who are taking, working in the very technology transfer, research, and so on, because you cannot just invite a researcher and tell him, oh, you'll be working with the research council. That's not attractive to work with the research council. He wanted probably to have a life also beside doing research. What I am trying to suggest to Mahmoud, to Khalil, is to try to make a focus more on the Vision 2040, probably take those 5 sectors one by one. So there will be a session on logistics, a session on tourism, a session on those 5 prioritized sectors. I would throw the question again to Ayan. I would like to see more research from HSBC on trying to make Oman as attractive in terms of providing the basic financial advisory services, meaning having HSBC as a hub, or is it really the legislation that's not making this happen? Because I know it's not the buildings. By the way, Riyadh created a financial center in terms of buildings and infrastructure 10 years ago, but still it's not functioning. The Riyadh financial system is not yet functioning. One of the most attractive and sophisticated buildings, infrastructure, communication, whatever, data centers, but not yet there. We don't want to compete with the neighbors when it comes to financial center, but we want to create a niche financial center to serve our need of resources to tackle those issues that are raised by Vision 2040, especially those prioritized sectors, rather than having a fully fledged financial center. Thank you. I think I've talked a lot again. Thank you, Mohammed.
That's good. Thank you. So there are a lot in Oman, but yet a lot need to be done. So if I may request Mr. Simon to give us a summary, and so we can close out.
A summary is generally done at the end, as you suggest. I think today I did it in the middle when I intervened. So our presenter took us from the local scene onto the international scene. He wants us to have a look at the benefits of the international business, and he cited many benefits. And then he defined what are the parameters for a good location for international businesses to be in. And finally, he gave us some advice for Oman to align ourselves with the options, with the vision of 2040. Prior to that, it was lots of information was communicated to us through surveys that they did with their clients. And I've noted down, things which, having lived through COVID, agree with totally, like getting closer to the employees. This COVID thing brought beneficial things like getting closer to employees, suppliers, and customers, like focusing on the culture more than, and be more agile, reshaping and not adjusting, reshaping the supply chain, give more attention to technology and sustainability. And we did not talk much about it, but we did hint on its importance, not us, you know, those who answered your survey, on environmental sustainability. So we in Oman, we share these results of the survey, I think. I do agree with Dr. Abdulaziz that probably we have to take in Majlis al-Khonji one or two focused talks to complete what Ian has put in front of us. I think it's, as usual, a great and interesting presentation. Thank you, Khalil, in particular, for leading this session. Thank you.
Shukran. Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. Very interesting topic. Lots of areas to address. But again, I think the takeaway is that we need to focus. We have a lot already as infrastructure, labor, and all that. So, but we need to fine tune here and there, including our regulatory framework. Let's end with Mr. Ian. Thank you, Ian, very much for today's session. Let's end with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to His Excellency Al Khonji for the kind invitation, Mike and Khalil as well for all your support, and thank you everyone that's participated. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's been some fairly challenging questions that I've maybe extended a little bit on my normal scope, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful, but I would very much agree that I struggle to get to that next level down because there's just so much to talk about here, and I think maybe starting to look on a specific sector basis and around that would be a helpful next step. So thank you once again, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
Reham.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have reached to the end of our session for this day. Thank you, Mr. Ian, for a very interesting discussion. Thank you, Mr. Khalil, for moderating this session. And thank you all for making it very rich, as usual. نلتقيكم إن شاء الله في جلسة الأسبوع القادم السبت القادم، الجلسة باللغة العربية بعنوان السياحة الجيولوجية. See you on Saturday. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reham.